Good afternoon, sir.
Hey, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. You're welcome, sir. We'll be starting
Yeah.
webinar by 3 p.m.
Okay. Am I the only person here yet?
The participants are already joining. The next speaker will be joining shortly.
Okay. All right then. It's good to see you. Sorry, what's your name again?
Jessica.
Jessica. Okay. It's good to see you, Jessica.
Thank you, sir. You too.
All right.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
You're welcome, sir. We're starting the webinar by 3.
By 3. Okay, that's fine. Let me adjust my filler. Hope you're okay.
I am.
Thank you.
Hello, Godwin. Good afternoon.
Hello, Sheena, how are you?
I'm fine. Oh, thanks.
Good, good. Nice to see you.
Yeah.
So, as well, right?
You said?
I think you're speaking as well.
Ah, now so we find out. You've gone almost fully gray beard.
Yeah. What can we do? It's nature. We have to we have to gladly accept it. Nice to see you again.
Yeah. The way this thing. Yeah. Good to see you.
I can see some on your hair, even though they are.
Oh, no, it's actually plenty over there. But my beards are not gray. Yes.
No, funny enough, I have more grays than on my head, but I think the gray is spread all over the head as well. So it's just a question of time. But these ones, I don't know, for whatever reason, grew.
Oh, really?
Grew gray faster than.
Yeah, just okay. Yeah. Oh, wow.
Where have you been?
I'm fine. Are you?
Good. We have our head above water, so we cannot complain. We thank God. If the head was beneath the water now, that's where it would have been an issue.
Despite all.
Yes.
Yeah.
God has been faithful.
Yeah.
Good. So kickoff is at 3 p.m. It's almost 3 p.m. So how many minutes do we have each?
Yeah, in 2 minutes time, I think.
Okay. That's good.
She said 20 minutes.
20 minutes each. Okay.
Yeah.
The whole program is for how many hours? 1 hour plus, 1 hour 30 minutes?
It shouldn't be more than an hour.
Okay.
Jessica, you're on the line. Let us know now.
Yes, sir. It's for 1 hour 30 minutes, sir.
We're asking how many minutes per speaker?
Okay, like 20, 30 minutes.
How long is the entire program?
The entire program is for 1 hour 30 minutes. So we'll be taking questions and answers after the presentation of everyone's presentation.
In fact, I've been meaning to ask you, I just never had the time. The conversation is around endangered species, right? Wildlife conservation.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Just wanted to be sure.
Well, I got a topic that says using environmental tools to resolve, to address global pandemics, and only for me to now see that Larry had posted on LinkedIn a different topic about perspectives and the rule of law or something, But we were able to resolve.
So in fact, it was yesterday evening when I saw that. I had to call the guy at the office. I remember you mentioned something about endangered species. I think that is what it is about. Oh, yeah. Reward the freezer. Yeah.
So that's it. But I mean, it's good that we're here to share knowledge and to learn from each other. And so, Jessica, can we kick off now?
Yes, sir, we can. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another exciting edition of the ES Practical Lawyer Free Webinar Series. My name is Jessica Ekenedu. I'm today's moderator. At ESQ Training we provide comprehensive continuous professional learning with courses and training across various areas of practices. We have tagged this webinar series, launch our webinar series, are slated to hold at 3 p.m. every Tuesdays and Thursdays respectively. After every section, we'll provide the resources in easy accessible format on the go for everyone who is interested. And we are streaming live on YouTube and on Facebook. And today's topic is using environmental law tools to address global pandemic. And this will focus on environmental law enforcement elements that influence the evolution and how environmental law can be used as a preventive strategy. And some of the things that will be discussed today is using environmental law tools to address global pandemic and the overview of regulative environmental law. If you have any question while the webinar is going on, please do type on the Q&A and it will be answered after everyone's presentation. And it's a great pleasure that I introduce our speakers for today, Mr. Godwin Omoka, who is a senior advocate of Nigeria and a partner at Templars. He'll be speaking on using environmental laws to address global pandemic. And we have Mr. Sipasi, who is a partner at ALEX, and he'll be talking on the overview of regulative environmental laws. Thank you so much for joining us today. And over to you, Mr. Godwin, sir.
Thank you, Jessica, for that very good introduction. I truly appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon, Sheena. Nice to see you again.
Good afternoon.
I mean, you know, when you see Sheena, you know that there's a lot at stake. You know, a lot is going to come out of him. So thank you. It's a pleasure, everyone. Like Jessica said during her intro, I'll be speaking on the topic using environmental law tools to address global pandemic. And I'll also briefly touch on some aspect of environmental rule of law and perspective and responses. But let me begin by sharing my screen. I think I have a slide. Jessica, I'm not too good at this, but I will try. So I'm trying to share my screen. So where do I go to? Yes. I hope I got it right.
Yes, sir, you did.
Okay, so after all, I'm not too old after all, eh? So I'm a bit techie. So thank you. It's just a minute to just put this by the side. Thank you. So like I said, the topic is using environmental law tools to address global pandemic. As we all know, Nigeria is among the economies that is faced with a lot of environmental problems, such as continued exploitation of marginal lands, droughts, gully erosion, uncontrolled logging uncontrolled logging in the forest, and all of this has serious impact on the Nigeria biodiversity. It leads to a destruction of the Nigerian biodiversity. And of course, all of this will have overall impact on the environment, and that will impact also ultimately impact how human beings interact with the environment, and the potential fallouts from that as well will become obvious. Now, while the specifically with regards to the COVID-19, while the origin of this virus remains very sketchy, one fact remains inevitable and which we cannot run away from is the fact that there has been this contention that it's a natural evolution from certain relevant factors that have affected our ecosystem, that have led to endangerment of species, and possibly even the extinction of certain animal species as a result of various interferences by human activities in the environment. So, I mean, that's very important. And what we have seen in Nigeria over time is that we've seen our environment exposed in ways that are very detrimental to the environment itself, to the species that inhabit the environment, and to we human beings that live in the environment. So for that reason, it's very important that the environment is protected and that humans have a way to interact with the environment in a manner that is regulated and safe. And for these reasons, you have a lot of laws and regulations. Government policies have been enacted to protect the environment from human degradation. And the enforcement of these laws and regulations have a role in addressing and forestalling or preventing, if you like, global pandemics. So, and it is this ability to adhere to or comply or be bound by these rules and regulations that have been enacted specifically to address issues relating to the destruction of the environment, that is termed the environmental rule of law. Now, what is the environmental rule of law? It's really concerned with the ability to, like I said previously, to be comply with environmental laws as part of a global effort to ensure or attain sustainability of the environment in the long term. So it really describes how we as individuals respect the laws that have been put in place by our government, by our local authorities in relation to the environment. For instance, we tend to see that certain areas are reserved as, with respect to forestry now, as forest, but you see people go in there to fall woods. I mean, if you fall woods, it's contrary to certain regulations and certain laws, but we see that that is a rampant behavior. So these laws are put in place to ensure that we respect the laws, the environment, and we do not take steps to destroy the environment. Now, the first global report on environmental rule of law was actually released in 2019 by the UNEP. UNEP means United Nations Environment on Protection. And there it identifies 7 basic characteristics of the environmental rule of law. I will just quickly go through them. The first is that the environmental rule of law must be critical to human health and welfare. And this is very important because what it does is to ensure that strict compliance to standards and procedures, and then of course approaches that set forth to ensure that we have good clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment. It is very important that all of those standards that have been set as a result of the environmental rule of law are respected and obeyed. Otherwise, we may not have clean air, we may not have clean water, and we may not have a healthy environment. And I'll give you a very good example that readily comes to mind. We've seen that over the past 3 or 4 years in River State, I don't know how many of you have recently traveled to River State, they've had this black suits phenomenon that has been in the air. And I think recently it led to the governor of River State having to arrest some people for illegal oil refinery. Why is that so? It's as a result of the fact that people are not complying to good environmental practices. I mean, refining crude oil, contrary to laid down procedure and against governmental guidelines and international best practices, will actually affect the quality of the air and the quality of the water and the environment generally. So that's a phenomenon that we have seen in Port Harcourt in recent times. As well, we'll see that the environmental rule of law is multi-dimensional. So it stretches across various laws and norms, from societal and customary norms of villages to statutory norms of laws or to voluntary standards. So all of this is important. Even international government regulations, it's very important to ensure that that environmental rule of law is that basic characteristic It's reflected in everything that we do. It's also shaped by response to significant political, economic, and social dynamics that are particular to natural resources, namely the tragedy of the commons and the resource cost. I mean, this is very interesting. What do we mean by the tragedy of the commons? I mean, the ultimate depletion of natural resource as a result of continuous use is actually what is called the tragedy of the commons. And good examples are you see overhunting, overfishing in the waters that leads to almost extinction of fishing. So those communities where these are engaged on this over depletion of resources take place, sorry, that it ultimately affects the wildlife or the environment itself is what is referred to as the tragedy of the commons. And with resource course, Nigeria is a fitting example of what is termed resource course. Nigeria, Angola, Saudi Arabia, where we have a mono economy that is really dependent on oil or hydrocarbon, if you like. And so in that respect, the resource that the country produces becomes sort of paradoxically a cost to it, in the sense that there's over dependence instead of diversification of the economy. The fourth characteristics, if I may, of the environmental rule of law is that management of the environment also implicates that moral and ethical duties, the moral and ethical duties of humans who, sorry, the management of the environment also implicates the moral and ethical duties humans owe non-human species and resources. Many species survival rest upon the success of the environmental rule of law, and this is true. Those relationships that we owe to both human and non-human resources, how do we manage them? We owe people an obligation. I think if for those of us who studied the law of thoughts, we talk about who is my neighbor. And that is no least important in the environmental context as well, because whatever we do with respect to the environment impact not only the environment, but also the animals that live in the environment. Many times people say, oh, I woke up this morning and I saw a snake in my house. How will you see a snake in your house? If not because there has been some distortion to the environment. Naturally, snakes are not supposed to cohabit with human beings, but because humans interfere and have managed the environment in a way that affects the habitat of snakes, then they begin to look for a safer and quieter environment where they can migrate to. It also requires public involvement, because all our communities all our resources will depend on environmental rule of law. The sixth and then the seventh characteristics of the environmental rule of law is that it involves uncommon time scales that could stretch for centuries and even more. And of course, it depends on decision making in the face of significant uncertainty. There exists some uncertainties and limitations in our understanding of the environment. Regardless, decisions have to be made in response to environmental changes. Not everybody understands the phenomenon of climate change, right? Not everybody understands why desertification happens. Not everybody understands why certain rivers get dried up. But at the end of the day, as human beings and as lovers of the environment, as those who manage the environment, we have to take steps and take decisions that can help address some of these issues, if not all of these issues. So that is it with respect to the environmental rule of law, perspective and responses. The most important thing is that as humans, in our interaction with the environment, we should be able to comply, obey and enforce all the laws and regulations and governmental policies that will help us have a better environment. Now, I will talk about humans and pandemic, using the COVID-19 pandemic as a case study or an example. I mean, man is not new to pandemics. I think the earliest human recollection of pandemics date back to the 14th century, about 13 something the 1300s, when we had the Black Deaths. And of course, in the last 20th century, in 1918, we had the Spanish flu. Before then, not many people realized that in the 1700s, we had malaria as a pandemic. Malaria, if you do some research, actually killed more people the world than probably the Spanish flu. And then, of course, we had the HIV/AIDS, and we dealt with Ebola, and currently the world is dealing with COVID-19, which gradually, again, I think, kudos to the human community. We've been able to deal with the environment, with COVID-19 and cope with it, even though it has had its own fair share of destabilization or disruption of human activities. Now, the virus was traced in Wuhan, China. The story is very popular. We all know how it came about. But the question is, how did we come about COVID-19? Now, it has not been easy to track or trace the origin of the virus. There have been differing accounts, but I think but one thing that has been unanimously agreed upon is that the virus can be traced back to the ecosystem changes that have decreased biodiversity, consequently facilitating contact between humans and animal reservoirs, such as bats and pangolins that carry pathogens. Pathogens are, of course, those diseases, including the SARS-CoV-2, which is responsible for the COVID-19 virus. So really, it was traceable to, it was seen as a zoonotic disease, a disease that flows from animals to human beings, or vice versa. And why is that so? Because really, I will explain briefly that human beings have interacted with the environment in such a way that we have, especially in relation to animals, interacted with the environment in such a way that we have contact with animals when we shouldn't. And even when we have contact, at times we don't have safe contact with these animals. So a lot of human activities, such as climate change, deforestation, wildlife trafficking, wildlife consumption, have really severely altered our ecosystem, and then thereby creating this human-animal interaction, and that leads to the transmission of disease. Now, the first point I will talk about that could potentially lead to the rise of a pandemic, or the severe or cause a severe spread of a pandemic, is climate change. We've talked about all I mean, a lot of us know about climate change. We hear all those stories about global warming, what the effect is of human activities having on the ozone layer, on the climate, and how this in turn is leading to a heating up of the human environment. The seas are getting warmer. I recall when I used to grow up in the north in those days, playing up as a child, the weather used to be very cold, but nowadays temperatures ranging between 5 to 6, 7 degrees in Nigeria. Yeah, there, but nowadays you see temperatures of about 28, 30 degrees. So a lot of this is caused principally, like one scholar said, by human activities or human mismanagement of the Earth's resources, leading to the direct impact on human health. Now, some of the common causes of climate changes have been traced to emission of greenhouse gases, GHG, into the atmosphere, improper disposal of waste, logging waste, then logging the use of chlorofluorocarbons, CFC3s, which result in rise in global temperature, sea level, and a general destruction of the natural habitat. If you see from the graph that is on the side of my screen, I don't know how many of you can see my screen. If you can see my screen and you see the graph, which was taken from the United States Environmental Protection Agency, you see that between 1800 and 2020, 2 years ago, there have been a significant spike in the global temperature. It has really significantly spiked. Even the so-called polar regions that are cold in the world we're beginning to see that a lot of melting of the ice and the glaciers in those areas. Now, a scholar, Dr. Aaron Bester, the director of Harvard Center for Climate Health and the Global Environment, gave a vivid picture of the inextricable link between climate change and the spread of pandemics when he said, and I will just quote him, he said, as the planet heats up, animals big and small, on land, in the sea, are headed to the poles to get out of the heat. That means animals are coming into contact with other animals they normally wouldn't, and that creates an opportunity for pathogens to get into new hosts. End of quote. He then concludes, I quote again, he says, many of the root causes of climate change also increases the risk of pandemics. So there's that correlation between pandemic and climate change. And I've already made conditions more favorable to the spread of some infectious diseases, including Lyme diseases, waterborne diseases such as Vibrio parahemolyticus, which causes vomiting and diarrhea, and mosquito-borne diseases such as malaria and dengue fever. So that shows the connection potentially between climate change and diseases. Again, like I said, a lot of studies are ongoing at this area, but that potential link cannot be taken away. Now, the graph that you have there shows us the various stages of human animal contact induced by perhaps climate change. So for step 1, you see humans. Step 2, you see human activities that could lead to climate change, such as the release or the emission of greenhouse gases. Step 3, you see the effects of climate change on the environment. And in step 4, you find out that animals are beginning or trying to move to different locations, neutral locations. And in step 5, you see that migration of animals to the pole and closer to human beings can really generate or lead to the spread of pathogens, which are disease-causing events. Now, the next point that could potentially lead to a pandemic, deforestation, which simply means the cutting down of trees without planting new ones. And we see that every day in an environment. You go to our forests, you go to our communities, you go to our trees, the world over, people are cutting down trees. Trees are being felled and they are not being planted. So that leaves, that impacts the environment in a very, very negative way. And I'm going to talk about deforestation really from a statistical point of view. You see that from my slides that from between 1990 to date, it has been reported that over 420 million hectares of forest has been lost. And an average of 15.5 million hectares of forest were destroyed every year in the world. That is huge, that is significant. Now we lose this forest and then we are not able to replenish them back by replanting trees. Every day you go, you see people, oh, they need wood to build houses, they need wood for furniture and all of that. All of these are being taken from forests, trees that have been felled. But nowhere do we see a replenishment of these trees that have been felled. In 2020, there were statistics that showed that 25.5 million hectares of forest were lost due to deforestation, which amounts to double the amount of the forest land lost globally. Now let's come back home to Nigeria. In Nigeria, the annual rate of deforestation is between 3.5% and approximately 350,000 to 400,000 hectares of forest are lost per year. Colossal. And by 2020, Nigeria has lost 14% of her primary forests. So we are losing our forests faster than we are gaining them. And again, obviously, this will definitely impact the environment, right? So, and that's why we say that deforestation is another event that could potentially trigger pandemic among human beings. Because why? It's simply because it destroys natural habitats of wildlife and increases the rate of human and wildlife contact and the consequential transmission of deadly disease, as we have seen in the case of COVID-19, because COVID-19 came about as a result of human beings coming into contact with bats, which are said to be reservoirs or habitats for pathogens. Now, one other potential trigger for pandemic will be wildlife trafficking. Again, we see this, it's very common in Africa. People are smuggling, there's illegal trade, poaching, people are capturing and keeping wildlife in their residence. Some are selling them. Protected animals that are not supposed to be tampered are being killed, game hunting and all of that is going on. The effect of all of these is that, again, it could lead to a situation where humans and the world at large could be exposed to potentially disease-carrying animals, and once that come in, because they are called zoonotic, it's called zoonotic transmission from animals to human beings and from human beings to animals. When that happens, then we find out that we are likely to have potentially another pandemic. Now, we see that scientists have also maintained that the smuggling of pangolins in South Asia is one of the triggers of the raving pandemic, as smuggled animals carry viruses closely related to the coronavirus. So people are smuggling pangolins, they are animals that are being smuggled daily. And we need to cut down on wildlife trafficking. We need to cut down on poaching of wildlife, because at the end of the day, all of this, and why are they being poached? Why are they being trafficked? Because some of them have good economic value. And so we need to cut down on that. And that's why the environmental rule of law is very important, because when people understand that some of these species are protected species, then of course they will not touch them. Happily, the world over, we are beginning to see criminal sanctions in relation to the poaching of protected species and even wild game generally. Now, one other factor that we will look about is wildlife consumption. For those of us who are familiar with, in Nigeria, with bushmeat, we like to call it bushmeat. A lot of consumption of wildlife. In Nigeria, we call it bushmeat. Again, this is a potential intermediary for the transmission of disease from animals to human beings. It's very important. Let me give you a good survey statistically. It says, there's a survey conducted by Wild Aid in Nigeria in 2020. It was discovered that 70% of urban Nigerians have consumed bushmeat. It's going to be very difficult to see a Nigerian who have not eaten bushmeat, which is wildlife, at some point in their life. And 45% consume it within 2020 alone. In the year 2020, more than 45% of Nigerians consume bushmeat. Now, despite the COVID-19 pandemic and other zoonotic diseases and the links between bushmeat consumption and the spread of zoonotic diseases, 75% of the respondents of the survey mentioned that they intend to eat bushmeat in the future. So this is a practice. You travel all along our roadside, you see people roasting and selling bushmeat. These are reservoirs for diseases that could potentially lead to another pandemic. So those are the four main triggers for a potential pandemic in the world at the moment: climate change, deforestation, wildlife trafficking and poaching, and of course, consumption of wildlife. Now, I will quickly run through this. It just talks about the basic international environmental tools that could be adopted to address the environmental triggers of COVID-19 and other pandemics. Internationally, we have seen instruments that have been put in place by the international community to try to curtail the spread of pandemics, the spread of events, and then to preserve and protect the environment chiefly, because when you preserve and protect the environment, as a consequence, you also try to prevent the spread of some of these diseases that result in pandemics. So for instance, before the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, 1994, the whole idea behind this convention is to ensure that the stabilization of greenhouse gases concentrations at a level that will prevent dangerous human-induced interference with the climate. Then the Kyoto Protocol of 1997, which came on the back of the United Nations framework, is there as well. And the whole idea is to ensure that industrialized countries and economies in transition, like those of Nigeria, developing countries, limit and reduce greenhouse emissions in accordance with agreed individual targets. So targets were given as a result of the Kyoto Protocol to individual countries, and they are said to reduce their emissions into the environment consistent with the targets that have been given to them. The Paris Agreement 2015 is also another important one. Then again, we've seen commitment by multinational oil and gas companies. In fact, a lot of them these days have, I'm sure a lot of us will have heard of the concept ESG, environmental governance, environmental sustainability and governance, ESG. So the first word there, environmental, a lot of companies these days has as part of their core objective and principles, the protection of the environment to ensure their long-term sustainability. So whatever they do, they try to ensure that their company objective, their businesses, even though they are out to make businesses, but they're also conscious of the environment in which they operate, and they're already taking steps to ensure that they contribute their own quota to ensuring that we have a safer and healthier and cleaner environment. So, okay, we've seen also within Nigeria, we've seen Nigerian government have enacted a body of laws. I'll quickly run through them. We've seen the Necessary Act of 2017, which is really the chief environmental legislation in Nigeria as of today, by which the government tries to protect the environment and then created the body, the necessary, to ensure that as the body responsible for everything and all things environment, even though there are other players in the sector, but I think chiefly NASRE is the main body responsible for ensuring that the Nigerian environment is protected. Then we have, of course, various EIAs, Environmental Impact Assessment Act of 1992, which provides that before a company or anybody carries out any business or study or undertaking in the environment, construction or whatever, you have to do an assessment of how that would impact the environment. That have been ongoing for a long time. We have various petroleum regulations that also prevent the discharge and escape of petroleum products into waters within Nigeria and within the Nigerian territorial waters, and also into some aspect of international waters. We also have the Endangered Species Control of International Traffic Act 1963, which tries to prevent trade and in wildlife and endangered animals, and make sure that they are not extinct, because human beings will definitely, especially for those who like eating bushmeat, will try to kill some of them as bushmeat and eat them. And then for those who want to get economic value from them, we'll also try to sell them. Now, we also have the Harmful Waste Special Criminal Provisions Act of 1988, which prohibits all activities related to the purchase, sale, transit, transportation, deposit, or storage of harmful waste. I don't know how many of us are aware of the 1988 incident in Cocoa Delta State, where toxic, harmful waste were imported into Nigeria with a ship and deposited in Cocoa in Delta State. I think that was during the Babangida regime. There was a whole lot of hoopla in the society about why that should happen, given given the fact that toxicity is dangerous to human health. So that was a serious event, and I think all of this led to the enactment of this legislation. Of course, there are also provisions in the criminal code that also try to prevent or for some sort of protection to the environment and penalize those who have committed certain infractions of environmental law. Now, in terms of regulations, you have the National Environmental Soil Erosion and Flood Control Regulations, 2001, and we have the Nigerian Radioactive Waste Management Regulations, 2006. Policy documents, again, as part of the legal framework. We've looked at the international instruments, we've looked at local laws, and now we're looking at policy instruments that have been enacted by the Nigerian government. Within the National Renewable Energy Action Plan 2016. Now, this policy document sets out the implementation strategy of the National Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Policy, and it provides an overview on concrete policy and regulations, laws, incentives, and measures to be implemented to achieve Nigeria's renewable energy targets and the SEAL goals, the C for all goals. We also have the National Policy on Environment, which was revised in 2016, which is basically there to ensure that the environment is protected and that natural resources are conserved. I'll just quickly try to run through. The next slide is what steps do we take to prevent the occurrence of pandemics? What can we do to improve our environment? And I said that whilst we cannot control the emergence of disease, disease will always be part of us, but we can always protect the environment and have positive relationship with our environment through how we interact with the environment, and then also in the process reduce considerably the risks of disease and pandemics. I have made some suggestions on how we can achieve that. Chief of which is the fact that first and foremost, we have to ensure that we eliminate harmful practices like trading wildlife and all of that, consumption of wildlife meat and all of that. We have to ensure that we protect livestock and reduce human interaction with zoonotic animals. We also have to ensure that we obey all the rules and laws that have been put in place to ensure that we have a better, safer society, and ensure that we also encourage investment in clean energy. Gradually, we are seeing the world a transition from hydrocarbons or fossils to renewable, cleaner energy, other forms of energy like wind, power, solar, and all of that. These are energy transition. If any transition would ultimately help the environment as well, because greenhouse gas emissions arrive chiefly from fossils, which are hydrocarbons, into the atmosphere, and that will help really improve the overall climatic condition of the world and reduce the phenomenon of climate change. So in conclusion, I said that it is evident that the preservation of the environment is a critical tool in curbing the future occurrence of a global pandemic. A wide range of human activities are responsible for the depletion of the human environment, which in turn increases the susceptibility of the world to pandemics in the future. So as stakeholders, we are required to contribute and participate in taking concerted steps, as highlighted above, toward the preservation of the environment, which would in turn help in curbing a future pandemic associated with transmission of zoonotic disease to human beings. So we must, to be able to achieve this, we must, like I said before, ensure that we respect and obey all environmental rules of law and ensure that they are enforced both locally and internationally. So thank you very much. That is the end of my presentation. I hope I didn't overshoot my time too much. I was expecting that Jessica would call me to order, but she didn't. So I just tried to round up. So thank you very much. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, sir. Actually, I sent you a private message. I'm sure you didn't see it, sir. Okay, before our next speaker, please, if you do have any question, please do type on the Q&A, and after our next speaker, the questions will be answered. Our next speaker is Mr. Sipasi, who will be speaking on overview of regulative environmental law. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you. I will just start straight away. I will try and share first. Okay. I'm not seeing the share button, sharing button yet.
Nice.
Okay, you will need to stop sharing SCN. Okay, I hope you can see what I'm sharing.
It's not yet up. Yes, I can.
Okay. Just give me a moment, just to be sure. Okay. I will be looking at overview of regulatory and environmental laws. A lot of the things I should have covered have already been covered, and it is very good. So I wouldn't be talking about, I wouldn't be dwelling so much on the basis for the laws, the environmental laws that we have in Nigeria. But I will just mention a few things by way of introduction, in addition to what the previous speaker has already outlined. Just a few things to say that the basis for environmental law and policy in Nigeria is the Constitution. And we have that in section 20 of the Constitution, which provides that the state is empowered to make laws that will improve and safeguard the environment. And by the environment, the Constitution is quite precise as land, forest, wildlife, water, highlighted a case law on this. Although law has to do with a criminal matter in the case. Basically, in the provisions of governments can enact laws. So as a result of that, it is clear that all the levels of government, the federal government, the state governments, and the main sources of environmental are what have laws already domesticated by Nigeria, laws contained in international treaties, laws made by National Assembly, laws made by various houses of assembly, where he hasn't dwelled so much on that, but then there are other environmental related laws made by various houses of assemblies. And we see that that is prevalent in states, in the oil producing states especially. We also have environmental related laws that are made by local governments. There was a survey I did a couple of years ago, and looking at that survey, looking at environmental laws that have been enacted by different levels of government across Nigeria then, and we had close to 100 pieces of legislation. You will be an environment, or that can qualify as environmental law. The key environmental laws enacted by the federal government have already been covered in the previous presentation. This slide simply also shows that when we're discussing the environment or discussing environmental law, it is interesting that there's a nexus between environmental law and fundamental human rights. We see that our Constitution grants us fundamental human rights, but quite a number of these human rights have one thing or the other. to do with environmental law. Right, for instance, to a safer environment, to a clean environment, and things like that, closely linked to the right to life. We also have the Article 4 of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, which basically gives the which is basically being, which basically states that all people have the right to a general a satisfactory environment suitable to their development. I will just move quickly to the next slide. What I have decided is that it is going to take forever to try and do an analysis of all the laws that we have in Nigeria. But looking at the particular interest of this seminar, which has to do with pandemic or the prevention of pandemic. What we decided to do in this slide is to focus more on the laws capacity, and the principal law in that regard that deals with biodiversity is the law that we have enacted to implement the United Nations Convention referred to as CITES. But before I go into that, what I have tried to do is to define what biodiversity means. Biodiversity is a short form for biological diversity, and it means essentially the variability among living organisms from all sources, amongst other terrestrial, marine, and other aquatic ecosystem, and the ecological complexes that forms part of this ecosystem, including diversity within species, between species, and ecosystem. This definition is a definition on biodiversity that was crafted in the Convention on Biological Diversity. And this definition is precisely in Article 2 of that convention. The issue of biodiversity was one of the important issues that that was released as Agenda 21. Agenda 21 was organized by the United Nations Convention on Sustainability. And one of the items that agenda covers is the preservation of biological diversity. It was pursuant to that convention, so it was pursuant to that conference that this convention was released. That's the Convention on Biological Diversity, and biological diversity was described to cover what this definition that you're seeing on the screen covers. Now, the question is, why is biodiversity valuable? One of the reasons why biodiversity is valuable is because the biodiversity that we see around us, and by biodiversity, we're looking at plant life, animal life, fish life, and so on and so forth. All the things, all the animal life, all the living life that we see around us, according to scientists, they are the output of about 4 billion years of evolutionary process. So where we are today, it took the Earth about 4 billion years of journey to get there. So this is one of the reasons why biodiversity is a big deal. Its preservation is a big deal. The second is that it is a complex interaction of life. When you look at biodiversity, you see a whole range, and you see a whole of variety. For instance, if you look at the fish types, for instance, there are thousands upon thousands of types of fishes, and within the fish family, there are hundreds of varieties, if not thousands of varieties. This is one of the reasons why biodiversity is valuable, because it is nature. It is nature. They cannot be substituted by human innovation. You can't recreate fish. You can't recreate no matter how basic they are. And we know that biological life range from basic to complex. And just like was presented in the previous paper, there's a lot of serious argument to show that the loss of biodiversity contributed to the various pandemics we have had. The fact that biodiversity is not being properly preserved, conserved, have led to sometimes the transition of diseases from from animals to humans. Apart from COVID-19, a good example is the Ebola virus. That has been proven beyond doubt that Ebola virus actually transited from a type of monkey in the Congo to man. And we know how deadly that is. But there's also studies that seem to show that the current COVID-19 pandemic is actually a transition from animal to man. And when you look at pandemic, when you look at even ways and means for treating and developing medicine for pandemic, you will see how sensitive the preservation and conservation of biodiversity is to human life. In fact, there's a popular writer that says that humanity will essentially be shortening its life cycle if it does not pay serious attention. So some of the things I've listed here basically gives the argument stating the reason why biodiversity is important, why its conservation is crucial. Now, in looking at biodiversity, we just focus in this slide on biodiversity law in Nigeria and his scorecard. And the key biodiversity legislation that we have in Nigeria is the Endangered Species Control of International Trade and Traffic Act. This law basically domesticates the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. What countries have done is to determine that one of the ways in which to protect biodiversity and in which to protect endangered species is to clamp down on international trade on endangered species. So this convention, for instance, prevents illegal trade in certain exotic animals and also illegal trade in certain exotic plants. So the convention has a range of list of items that are prevented, items that are prevented from being illegally traded internationally. And a lot of this trade happens all over the world. We have a lot of animals that are protected in Africa, but because of poor regulation or poor being daily poached, many of these plants, and the reason why
Sir, you're muted.
Okay, all right. I hope I'm no longer muted.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, okay. So apart from the Endangered Species Law, we have different states in the country. Quite a number of them have what they call the Forestry Law. They have what they call the Forestry Law. Forestry Law is again one of those local legislation that we have that have been enacted by the different states in Nigeria, basically to preserve biodiversity. And then we have the National Park Service Act, which establishes the national park and also establishes the agency that manages the different national parks that we have in Nigeria. Now, the interesting thing is that this national park agency and the different parks that have been designated as national park, actually, I mean, they contribute to biodiversity. They contribute to biodiversity preservation and conservation in Nigeria. Now, the interesting thing is that Nigeria is categorized as a category 1 country under the CITES National Legislation Project. And what this means is that when you look at the category 1 countries, these are the countries that are rated the best. When you look at their laws, concerning the implementation of CITES, this Convention on International Trade on Endangered Species, Nigeria is rated as one of the best countries. All the laws that should have been enacted for the implementation of CITES have already been enacted by Nigeria. And that is because through the Endangered Species Act, Nigeria had adopted all the necessary CITES convention and regulation. So Nigeria has a grade A law when it comes to protection of endangered species. However, the implementation of this law is weak. Many reports have, while they acknowledge that Nigeria has all the necessary law, they've also stated that our implementation of the laws is weak. And the reason why we have weak implementation, the first one is because of our federal structure. Because of our federal structure, as you are aware, or as the lawyers will be aware, we have different penal codes in Nigeria. We have different penal codes. And because of this, the approach to penalizing or to implementing the penalty under the Endangered Species Act differs. So that's number one problem. The second thing is that there's a lack of training. Most of the people that are charged, most of the agencies that are, and the personnel that are charged with implementing the Endangered Species Law in Nigeria are not properly trained. And because they are not properly trained, number one, they are not aware of CITES. They are not aware of the reasons for this law. They are not aware of the need to protect animals that are considered endangered. They're not even aware of these animals or plants that are considered endangered. So you have a situation where a lot of these plants are leaving the borders of Nigeria without the agencies that have been tasked with preserving them or with conserving them or with controlling such illegal or such trade paying any attention. So there's a need to ensure that the agencies are trained. And when we talk about these agencies, we're talking about the customs, we're talking about necessary personnel, and we're also talking about the personnel of the National Park Service. What I have not listed is that there are also personnel that are expected to be in charge of forestry preservation. Many of these personnel don't understand the concept of endangered species, they're not properly trained to identify the endangered animals and the endangered plants, and therefore they're not able to stop the illegal trade or the illegal exportation, the illegal export of many of these plants and animals from Nigeria. Another area that is fueling the weak enforcement system in Nigeria is because we don't have intelligence-led investigation. Also, where defaulters are arrested, they are not quickly prosecuted. In fact, what we see is that the custom or the national official, we just ask people to pay the fine. The fine used to be 1,000 naira, but it has, that section has been amended. The fine is now about 5 million naira for exporting this. As long as people can pay the fine, they can go ahead and they will not be prosecuted for the illegal export for the illegal export. So what we'll be looking at in the next slide, are the things that need to and that has to be done to ensure that we improve our biodiversity law. We must have a national strategy to prioritize endangered species. Right now, the import or export of endangered animals or plants doesn't rank high in the priority of the different agencies that are at the border. It doesn't rank high. They're looking out for drugs. They're looking out for weapons. They don't pay attention to if someone is exporting snake or importing a particular plant or animal. It doesn't rank high at all. For those who travel abroad, we notice that if you're going to be importing food or certain things, they will take you to a corner and they're going to examine what it is you have. They're going to examine what it is you have. And the reason why they're doing this is because of this CITES convention and CITES regulation. So there's a need for us to harmonize our law, especially our forestry laws. There are so many laws on the state level. There's a need to harmonize them. Many of these laws conflict against each other. So there's a need for harmony. There's a need to streamline the power of the agencies, because a lot of times you see them working at cross purposes, and the agencies in this respect have to do with the enforcement agency in the states, personnel of NESRIA, and customs. In fact, in most cases, you see a situation at the airports and at the ports where you find custom officers, you don't have NESRIA officers that can help identify some of these endangered animals and plants. Another thing that has to be done to include our biodiversity law and our implementation is improvement of our investigation and prosecution capabilities. And this has to do with training. We need to train the enforcement agencies at the different borders. We need to train the enforcement agencies at the different states. We need to train the enforcement agencies who are involved in the enforcement of these laws within Nigeria. We also need to pay attention to trial and sentencing. One of the reasons why the laws are not being properly enforced is because it takes a long time to get trial done. If you're able to charge someone to court, it takes a long time to get trial done. The person, of course, will go out on bail. It takes a long time to get a trial done. And also, because the judges do not understand how these laws work, again, we see that that's a problem. So we need to support the judges. We also need to look for consider international cooperation. Considering the time, I will be stopping at this point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for an insightful presentation. Okay, we're going to question and answer. Someone is asking, this is from Mr. Godwin, what are some actions people can take to curb the growth of illegal wildlife trafficking?
Okay, I will answer that. I think I think the first thing is really awareness. Awareness. The interesting thing is that in many advanced countries, this issue of trafficking of wildlife is taken as seriously as trafficking of illegal drugs like cocaine, heroin, and things like that. Although the penalty is not the same, but they watch closely as well, both for drug traffickers and also for traffickers in illegal wildlife. So a key thing that has to be done is awareness. And then the second thing, like I stated during the presentation, is the training of the agencies and personnel that are tasked with the enforcement of these laws. So training first, training, that's the first thing that needs to be done.
Thank you so much. So,
yeah,
Mr. God, you can say something.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Sheena. Enlightenment, education is very important. But beyond that also, we need to improve people's ability to be able to earn a living, to be able to make money. All right? It's important because can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, because at the end of the day,
yes, I can.
Why are people engaging in wildlife trafficking? There is an economic angle to it, both locally and internationally. So yes, education is important, but we also have to address the economic triggers, the economic incentives that encourages people to go into this sort of business. And like Mr. Sheena rightly pointed out, even in Nigeria and all over the world, it's a serious criminal offense to be involved in trafficking of wild animals. But that has not deterred these criminal elements, from doing that. I say criminal elements because really, some people do it as a business, others do it as a source of, how will I say, maybe something that is casual, all right, not serious as a business, but a sort of casualization of human trafficking. But for some others, it's their profession, that's what they deal with. So we need to identify this sort of traffickers and then address the issues so that at the end of the day, we're able to nip this in the bud. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Okay, I think I have another question here. Someone is asking, how can we reduce the risks we face from climate change? I think that's from Mr. Godwin.
Hello.
Hello, someone is asking, how can we reduce the risks we face from climate change?
How can we what?
Reduce the risks we face from climate change.
Oh, it's to generally, in my view, engage in good environmental practices. We have seen the United Nations Convention, Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1994, which sets out what the world should do together to reduce the effect of climate change. We've seen the Paris Accord, the Paris Climate Convention in 1995, or I don't know what year was that now. But again, that's also another important international instrument. We've seen that even in COP26, the question of climate change was also seriously addressed. So there is concerted global efforts to address the issue of climate change, but it's a long term. And you know that by a lot of countries have set pledge that by 2050, there will be net zero emissions, all right? But again, there's a lot of politics with that because even as countries try to achieve that, they would also have to balance their economics. There's a lot of economic and political undertone in this. For instance, why will China, for instance, reduce greenhouse emissions? And when it is beneficial to its economy. So a lot of issues are going there, but overall, I think in the long run, better environmental practices, countries taking steps to meet their targets under the various international instruments will really go a long way to reduce this.
Yeah, and if I may pitch in, so the climate change calls for both individual and collective action. And when I say collective, when I say individual, I mean individual as in natural persons, I mean individual as in states, and also collective actions of natural persons, collective actions of states. It is a global phenomenon, and it is also a realization of what happens, of the fact that what happens in one corner of the earth can affect the entire world. And if people understand this, so on an individual level, what are the things you need to do to pollute less? Do you want to fly less? Do you want to stop using firewood? Do you want to stop using maybe instead of using fossil fuel for your, those are things you can do on an individual level. However, that is too small. There's much more to be done, and that is being part of that advocacy that will galvanize governments, the government of your country, that will galvanize government to take the right action, implement the right policy to begin to move the nation and also move collectively with other parts of the world towards creating a greener future.
Thank you so much, sir. Okay, I think we have one more question. Someone is asking, should trees have the right? And if yes, how do you determine the scope of granting legal person status on trees?
Should trees have what?
Rights.
Okay, this is an interesting philosophical question. Okay, this is an interesting philosophical question, and the philosophical aspect of this webinar was taken by the Honorable Silk, by the learned Silk, but let me just add. I don't think, can think in terms of the fact of treating our environment right. And so, for instance, our right to live, life, our right to clean air, our right to live in a decent life is closely connected to how that we see around us. If you look at the beginning of the point that why is biodiversity enjoying today is a product of billion years. We'll know that although trees are trees and they're not human persons,
Okay, I think can anyone hear me?
There's a huge argument and a huge retreat. Trees are not about diversity with necessary extinction. Now, on the issue of granting. Hello?
Hello, okay, I think it's my internet. So, Mr. Gordon, would you like to say anything about the question?
Yes, what I would say is that I think it was an author a long time ago wrote something about trees, the hidden life of trees, and that trees should be treated. They are wonderful beings and with innate adaptability, intelligence, and the capacity to communicate with and heal other trees. So, I mean, this was a book written by Peter Wohlheber, the hidden life of trees. But what I would say is that tree is a living being, but when it says should trees have rights, I do not think that trees should be given rights, like the way you say human rights activists. We're already doing enough to protect the trees of the world by putting in place various policies, various international instruments to ensure that trees are not wantonly destroyed. Those in themselves are protective enough of the trees. But to go as far as saying accord trees rights, I wonder and I ask myself, what are the contours and the boundaries of those sort of rights that can be accorded trees? So I will not stretch the argument that far, but I would say let's continue in the good work the world is doing right now to try to protect trees and to encourage the planting of trees. And that when trees are to be felled, they are to be felled for specific purposes and specific instances and under specific circumstances. That is how far I'm willing to go at this moment.
And if I may say, that is a jurisprudence for Gen Z to consider.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. I think I must say it's an interactive and profound section today. Thank you to our speakers for joining us today despite your busy schedule. I'm looking forward to having your subsequent webinars. A very big thank you to our sponsor, LLP, Bluefield LP, Evalo Associates, Advocates Law Partners, DOA, and Farm-Based Solicitors. Thank you also to our attendees for participating in today's webinar. Please note that our next webinar series will be on Thursday by 3 p.m. and the topic will be on Nigeria Data Protection Law and targeting of social media users. Lastly, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel at My ES2 Legal to watch our past webinars and more webinars. Do enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, Essence. Thank you so much, Mr. Sakusu. Bye.